We get some crazy storms here in Tennessee. When the rains just start coming, we know that our rivers and creeks can do some crazy things. And that's not only true here in Tennessee, this is also true with the riverbeds in the land of Israel. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about one of Jesus's famous teachings and how he compares and contrasts what water does in the deserts of Israel and what that means for the storms when they come crashing into our lives. And hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'd like to invite you to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and then at the end of this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now let's dive in. Two weeks ago, I wake up in the morning and it is just pouring down rain, which for me is like, okay, where are the running shoes? We gotta get out and go for a run. So I grabbed my shoes and my action camera. I'm not sure why I did, but I just happened to grab it. And I'm so glad I did, because as I was out for my run, I came running right by this creek. In fact, the running path is right behind the camera here. And the level of the creek wasn't down here, it was over my head. And I grabbed my action camera and I just scanned it because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And as I was running back, I was like, man, that stream really rose up. And then it was like, those are the words of Jesus at the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And when he gets done with this amazing day of teaching, he says, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose up, the wind blew and beat against that house, and yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But likewise, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose up, the wind blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Friends, everybody in the audience would have chuckled at the contrast between building your house on the rock and building your house on the sand. Now, why would they have chuckled? Because there's only two kinds of sand in the land of Israel. You have seashore sand that you find along the coast, but the kind of sand that Jesus is referring to here is the kind of sand that you find at the bottom of a wadi. See, the deserts in Israel are not sand like the Arabian desert. It's actually hard rock. But at the base of a wadi, or in Hebrew a nahal, you find sand. So what is a wadi? What's a nahal? It's a dried riverbed. It sits at the base of rock, and you have this area where at times during the year, water will flow through it. And most of the time, the kind of water that's flowing through is what is called a flash flood. The number one killer in the desert is not dehydration, it's actually flash floods. Because a flash flood can happen at any time. It doesn't even have to be raining where you're at. In fact, more often than not, it is raining maybe 10 or 15 miles away up in the high hill country, and where it's pouring up there and the ground is hard, the water collects and it starts going downhill. And you can be in the middle of the desert walking through one of these wadis, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a wall of water will come and it will be a raging torrent running through the wadi. And so when Jesus says you build your house on the sand or you build your house on the rock, everybody there would go, okay, rock and sand, he's talking about wadis. Nobody is dumb enough to build their house in a wadi. You obviously build it up on the rock, above the wadi, away from the wadi. And then 2 months ago, I went to Montana for a several-day speaking engagement at a church, and my family came along with me as well, because afterwards we were going to go to Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons for a family adventure. And on one of the days where I'm speaking in the evening, a couple of the pastors said, hey, we would love to take you and your family out on a raft on the Yellowstone River. And we were like, this is fantastic. We'd love to do that. So we get out on the water, and we're probably 3 hours in, and I'm having a conversation with one of the pastors, and then he says to me, hey, turn around and check that out. And I turned around and saw this. And I was like, that is unbelievable. And he goes, yeah, we've had just a series of storms that have come through here. The river has risen up and it has just eroded the foundation of that house. And I thought, that is the best modern day example I have ever seen of Jesus's ancient words. And what that moment conveyed is the central idea that I want to center ourselves around in this episode, which is this: storms always reveal the foundation. They do. And storms are a guarantee. Hard times in life are a guarantee. This pandemic is a storm. The tensions in our culture is a storm. You may be going through an additional kind of storm right now. And storms always reveal the foundation. So let me just ask you, how are you doing in this season? What is being revealed in you? Just last week, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he has a buddy of his who's in a very famous band. And we were just kind of talking about, how they're doing in the midst of this, crazy COVID season and not being able to be on the road. And he just said to me, he said, Brad, the guy has changed dramatically over these last 7 months. He said before COVID began, he's happy, he's joyful, he's the life of the party, everybody wants to be around him. He's a super positive guy. And he said, he's not the same guy I know. And he said everything has changed. He said he's pessimistic, he's negative, he just sucks the energy out of the room. He said COVID has crushed this man. And as I was listening to that, it was like, yeah, storms reveal the foundation. What you put your faith and your hope and your trust in is laid bare when the storms of life come crashing in. And it's not that when things are bad and hard times come our way that we're supposed to just cruise through them. But the idea is that if you have a firm foundation, you can withstand those storms. And if we put our faith and our trust in our accomplishments, our achievements, or in our own personal health, or how well our kids are doing, or even in politics, we're all in trouble. We're filming this episode the day after the first debate. And I don't know about you, but I'm sitting on my couch watching this debate going, like, the moderator, he's patient, he's respectful, he's composed, he's firm but not overbearing, he's smart. Can we vote for this dude? And even if these were all candidates that everybody could go, oh, they are just solid from top to bottom, that still would fail us. Because friends, where our foundation is found is not in politicians or leaders or bank accounts or the ability to be performing on the road or on a stage. The foundation is found in Jesus Christ. And Jesus goes, let me be your foundation. Now, I know that sounds very Christianese and cliche, like Jesus is my rock. But what in the world does that actually mean? Well, what's the context of Jesus talking about building your house on a rock versus on the sand? It's coming on the end of the Sermon on the Mount. This amazing 3 chapters where Jesus is talking about all these different facets of life. He's talking about what does it look like to live in His kingdom, to live according to His values, to live life the way that God has called us to live. And my invitation to you would be, dig in to the words of Jesus. Go through the Sermon on the Mount. Study it, not just read it, and figure out what exactly is Jesus saying. What are His words in the midst of the Sermon on the Mount? But then ask the question, so then what am I going to do about it? See, this is what's astounding about how the Sermon on the Mount ends. When Jesus says, everyone who hears these words of mine is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. He goes through and he gives that, and then he says, and likewise, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. Everybody heard Jesus' words. And his point is not that you've heard them, but that you're actually doing something about them. That just hearing the words of Jesus doesn't transform us. It's actually doing the words of Jesus and being transformed in the process that we understand what it means to build our house on the rock. And the question for us today is, where does our hope reside? Do we allow Jesus and His very words to be the foundation of our lives? And again, not just the hearing of the words, but the doing of the words. I often have people will come up to me when I get to speak in different areas, and if it goes particularly well, they may say, hey, that was so powerful. Thank you for sharing those words. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I bless God for that. I'm so glad that God met you in this way. But what now are you going to do about them? I don't say that, that's what I'm thinking. Just hearing the word is not the same as doing the word. And when we do the Word of God in our lives, friends, I believe that it builds up a resilience within us, that when the storms come our way, again, we don't cruise through them, but we're able to withstand them. So for me, I get to run by this creek multiple times a week. And yes, I guess that rhymes. And as I'm running up here on this path and I hear the creek and I see the creek, it's a reminder for me, a reminder that I must consciously and constantly be building my foundation on the rock, on the words of Jesus Christ and walking them out. Because if I'm not living out the words of Jesus, then when the storms come, they take me out. Because storms always reveal the foundation. So may we all build our foundation on the rock. So friends, thanks so much for engaging another episode in the teaching series. So grateful that you had a chance to stop by, whether you're watching or whether you're listening. Thanks so much, and may you walk out the text well in your life.